Dr. Paul Kengor, this has been a remarkable journey that you have been on with first a book and then a movie. Start with the book. When did the book idea start and what sent you on the trail of the Crusader?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So long story, right? I'll try not to tell all of it, but the first book was God and Ronald Reagan. That came out in February 2004. And I had started the research on it here at Grove City College, right? I started teaching at Grove City College fall semester 1997.
What does that process look like? Are you just collecting?
Yeah, so I started collecting research, and I mean, I focused on this in my dissertation, and when I was in Washington, D.C. in the early 1990s, I got my master's degree from American University in Washington, D.C., and I graduated college, undergrad from Pitt, in May 1990. So my final years at Pitt were the fall of the Berlin Wall, end of the Cold War. I was a pre-med major. That's a whole long story. But changed my major in the last year, decided not to go to medical school, became intensely interested in the end of the Cold War, had been really non-political, non-ideological all my life. And then I became just fascinated with this question of how did the Cold War end, right? How did this come about? And I knew that there was this dominant figure in political life, Ronald Reagan, won 44 out of 50 states in 1980, reelected with 49 out of 50 states in 1984.
Were you a Reaganite?
I wasn't. I mean, I knew nothing really about politics other than, I mean, you and I were both part of this era, right? I know I'm older than you. I don't know by how much, but yeah, a little bit. But remember how this was, everybody liked Reagan, right? I mean, even people who didn't agree with him politically, everybody liked him. In fact, I even opened the book, The Crusader, with a quote from Walter Cronkite. And Cronkite was America's news anchor, CBS News, and a big liberal. And he said, everybody loves Reagan. I've never seen anything like it. I remember Franklin Roosevelt. I never thought I'd ever see anybody as popular as Roosevelt. But Reagan has it. Nobody hates him. Everybody likes him. So we all liked him, and just living through the era, you knew that Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire, pursued Strategic Defense Initiative, which the critics called Star Wars, and he had this plan to win the Cold War. And I remember people around me, people I later found out were liberals, right, saying, oh, what an idiot, this will never happen, this can't ever, Reagan's living in fantasy land. And then all of this happened in the end of the 1980s. So I started focusing on how did it happen? What was Reagan's role? What were Reagan's ideas?
And how did the end of the Cold War happen?
How did the end of the Cold War happen? And specifically, what was Reagan's precise contribution, right? Which ideas?
Were you trying to disprove anything?
No, I was trying to, I wanted to see, first of all, if that case was really true, that Reagan did, as he put it to Richard V. Allen, say to him, we win, they lose, and then set on a specific course of action with specific policies, national security decision directives, NSDDs, to win the Cold War. So I wanted to know, how did he do it? What was his input? What did he say? So once I got to Grove City College, I said, I'm going to write that book. And I got a little bit of help from a grant, from a sabbatical, other things. Lee Edwards, who wrote the history of Grove City College, Freedom's College, helped connect me to a couple different people who gave me funding to make a trip out to the Reagan Ranch.
Well, you didn't start with the title. You didn't start with a God and Reagan story.
Yeah, no. So I started. I was at the Reagan Library in summer of 2001, and So I asked the archivist. I said, I want to see which things in which Reagan's speeches and whatever have his actual handwriting on it. I want to know what were Reagan's specific ideas. And the archivist is like, okay, all right, where do you want to start? And I said, well, I'd love to see the Evil Empire speech. And she said, okay, all right, I'll get it.
So this is the actual speech?
Yeah, the actual speech. So I'm waiting and waiting. It's like a half hour, 45 minutes. I don't even know if I might have had maybe a BlackBerry at that time. I don't know what I'm doing to kill the time. Where is it? Where is it? Finally, she brings out this cart. It's a cart with 3 rows across it, with boxes, with folders in it. And she said, here's the Evil Empire speech. I'm expecting one little manila folder with a speech in it. And I look at it and I see the entire first page. So it says written by Tony Dolan, who was Reagan's chief speechwriter. And the first page just has Reagan's markings all over it. Second page, completely crossed out. Flip over, next page, completely crossed out. Next page, whole handwritten page of Reagan stuff put in there. And
what was he Xing out?
I mean, all kinds of things. And even more interesting was what he was putting in. I mean, statements like, as C.S. Lewis says in the Screw Tape Letters, as Whittaker Chambers said in Witness, as the scripture says, and the other phrase that's in the Evil Empire, let us pray for all of those who live in that totalitarian darkness. That's Reagan's line. He added it. He wrote, insert here, that they may come to know the love of God, right? But otherwise, their leadership, this leadership of the Soviet Union, it is an evil empire. It is the focus of evil in the modern world. So right away, I knew here's a guy that was really contributing directly to all of this. Because if you had been that, is this old doddering fool, and he's got these advisors who are doing all this work for him. But as I came to see, I mean, it was all Reagan, especially you had this revolving door of national security advisors, all these different people. And then the other thing that I saw that really hit me, especially with and I opened my book, God and Ronald Reagan, by talking about all of this, were all the mentions of faith over and over and over again. I start reading through Reagan's private letters, and in one case, he's arguing with a Methodist minister who's doubting the divinity of Christ.
As president?
As president. And that one might have been before president, although what I'll say about that I saw in several letters. And Reagan says to the minister, well, it seems to me that either Christ would have been lying about this, would have been deceived about it, or is Lord. And he's basically, I'm like, this is C.S. Lewis's liar, Lord, or lunatic argument. Reagan's using this as an apologetic with a Methodist minister who's having doubts about the divinity of Christ. And meanwhile, I learned in the 1980s, Reagan, his wife consults astrologers. He doesn't go to church. I mean, the guy's not a serious Christian. He's just trying to make a bid for the evangelical vote. None of that's even true. But I saw, the more I read his private correspondence, his notes, his speeches, everything going back to, I eventually go to his church in Dixon, Illinois, that he grew up in, and suddenly I realized faith. Faith was absolutely the centerpiece of Reagan's life.
So when do you connect the two, the end of the Cold War with a private, personal reflections in faith? When does that, is that when you see the speech?
So I start to see that Reagan believed in what he and Bill Clark called a divine plan. They talked about it so often, they called it the DP. Clark was Reagan's closest advisor, probably his closest friend, the national security advisor who all of 1982 and 1983 laid out all the NSDDs to take down the Soviet Union. Clark became like a grandfather to me. So I ended up, after Clark read God and Ronald Reagan, he was so thrilled with what I wrote because he said, finally somebody reported the truth on this. I ended up becoming Clark's biographer as well. But I saw how they laid it all together. So as I'm writing this book on how Reagan ended the Cold War, believed that this was part of a DP, divine plan, divine providence, and faith was a part of it. So I start with this book that I'm kind of calling Reagan and the End of the Cold War generally. And I'm sharing this information with people, Lee Wishing and others here at Grove City College. You've got like an 800-page book here, but the real story right now is Reagan's faith in all of this.
They're saying that, or you're saying that?
They were saying it. I guess I had seen it too. I can't say who said it to me first, but I was struggling because I thought, how am I going to publish an 800-page book? And then at some point, I guess I realized it. Pull a separate book out of this, call it God and Ronald Reagan, and then do the book that would become The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism second. So I pitched God and Ronald Reagan to publishers.
And the reaction initially was what?
Yeah, I had a really good reaction from publishers. I had a whole bunch of them who wanted to do that.
Nobody's really covered that angle.
No one's really covered it, and even liberal publishers were, this might have been like the reaction to Whittaker Chambers' Witness, right? They were surprised. Initially they're thinking, this is kind of an anti-communist thing, probably a right-wing thing. And then they start reading it, and they're like, wow, this guy's really figured this out. He's onto something here. So I had, my agent Leona Schechter did a kind of like an open bidding, opened the bid at like 24, this time on the clock, ended by noon this day, and we had 6 or 7 different publishers that wanted the book. And it was Judith Reagan at the Reagan Books imprint, not Reagan, but Reagan at HarperCollins, and She made us the best offer, and also as Chuck Dunn, who was dean at Grove City College at the time, told me, he said, if you get that book through HarperCollins, I mean, it'll be a bestseller, right?
And it did well.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, it's not, people think bestseller, you're gonna make a lot of money. You usually don't make a lot of money unless you're Oprah, right? Or Michelle Obama, or somebody like that. You want people to read it.
Right.
You want to get the...
Shapes the dialogue.
Yeah, you want to get the message out to the world. You want the world to know that the secret to Reagan's success was his faith, his faith in God.
So how do you bridge then God and Ronald Reagan to the next book? How did that happen?
So God and Ronald Reagan came out February 6, 2004, which turned out to be his last birthday. So we released it on that date. It immediately went to New York Times bestseller list. I did Bill O'Reilly's show, all these other shows.
Any pushback from Reagan world, the Reagan family?
No, they all loved it.
Okay.
They were really thrilled. I mean, people like Peter Robinson, who wrote the Tear Down This Wall speech, and did a great book called How Ronald Reagan Changed My Life. And I had no idea who he was, but they sent him the manuscript for an endorsement, and he immediately reached out to me, called me by my first name, which is a humbling thing for a guy who at that point I'm like 37 years old. And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, "Gosh, Paul, you figured it out. Right? We knew that the faith was serious. You figured it out." So the book made the New York Times list February 2004, and then it falls off, right? You know, April, May, and then Reagan died on June 5th, 2004. And at that point, I was in everybody's Rolodex. Remember Rolodex? You guys know what a Rolodex is? So Rolodex, and they all called me back to talk about Reagan's faith during this time that he passed. I did like 80 talk shows the week that Reagan died.
Nobody else was out covering that piece.
No one else.
Because his pastors and...
Right, I was the go-to guy. People who wanted to know, well, Reagan died, what did he believe about God? Where does he think he is now? I was the one guy who could answer that. So that came out in 2004. I get a call, now we're getting to the movie. I get a call that summer from a Hollywood guy named Mark Joseph, who I didn't know. And he said, "Hi, my name's Mark."
What year is this roughly?
This would have been summer of 2004. Okay. And he said, "I'm a Hollywood producer. I've made some films. I've been involved in Chronicles of Narnia, The Passion of the Christ. I love this book. This is the book I've been waiting for. This is the book I wish I could have written. Does anybody have the movie rights?" And I said, "No, but I mean, if you're interested, right, we could talk." He said, "I'm calling you from the Rock River in Dixon, Illinois." And I said, that's the river where Ronald Reagan saved the lives of 77 people over 7 summers, right? And I said, "Well, you'll find this very interesting. My next book on Reagan, the follow-up to God and Ronald Reagan, is called The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism." And he said, "The Crusader?" And I said, "Yeah, it's really funny, but the Soviets called him the Crusader," in a kind of snide, mocking way. And by the way, to watch the film and to see the character Victor, played by John Voight, saying again and again, "We called him the Crusader," right? When I first saw that on the big screen, it kind of gave me chills, because I thought, well, I found that, right? I got that. I'm the guy who came up with that. And so I said, "Yeah, they called him the Crusader." I said, "Mark, that book opens with Reagan at the Rock River in Dixon, Illinois. And if you really want to understand Reagan..."
This is while he is at...
While he's at the... He's calling me from the Rock River. He's calling me from the Rock River. And he said, I said, "If you really want to understand Reagan, especially not just the faith, but the confidence, the belief that he could play the role of world rescuer, that he could rescue America and the world from the scourge of atheistic communism. Where did he get that kind of confidence, right? Well, it came from 77 out of 77, never losing a single save, right? I mean, a lot of people, I've had students say to me at Grove City College, "Professor Kengor, I've been a lifeguard for 5 summers and never rescued anybody," right?
Yeah.
So to have that many in this river with this...
Was it a dangerous river?
Very dangerous river. Okay. And I learned from the cover of the Dixon Evening Telegraph, which I have framed in my office here at the college, Reagan himself would watch up to 1,000 swimmers at a time in this brown river with these undercurrents. And when I first took my boys there, the first time I visited it would have been 2001 or 2002 summer. I grabbed their hands tightly because there was a sign. I said to my guide, who knew Reagan as a child, I said to her, "There's no swimmers." And she said, "Look at the sign. It's banned." I said, "No one's allowed to swim here anymore?" She said, "No."
The lifeguard's off duty.
Right. Yeah, but in Reagan's day, Reagan did all of that by himself and never lost a single sip. The owner of the beach, Ruth Graybill, said, "We never had a basket of clothes left behind when Reagan was lifeguarding. And in the previous summers, there had been plenty of baskets of clothes." She said, "That's because we had the ideal lifeguard. We had the best." So I told Mark Joseph, I said, "I think that's the movie. You want to base the movie on
And he
that
gets
book."
it right away?
He got it right away. And so we started with God and Ronald Reagan, and then, but we eventually focused it on the Crusader.
So was the working title God and Ronald Reagan?
Yeah, at that point.
For Mark's first draft of that?
No, at that point, from the very beginning, we called the movie just Reagan the Movie.
Okay.
And there were a number of different scripts. I was involved in all of it from the very beginning, editing, adding, cleaning up. And they were always really great about coming to me with, is this historically accurate? And you'll appreciate this. I had many times where I would say, okay, this exchange that you have here between Reagan and these characters, this is really good. You have no idea how close this is to the actual words, but if you want the precise exact words, I can give them to you, and historians could say, wow, every word of there in that is what Reagan actually said.
Did he care about that? Did Mark care about
He did, yeah. He cared about it. I mean, you take certain artistic license always, right, with dialogue. One of the scenes I really appreciate in the movie is where Bill Clark and Bill Casey and Reagan are talking about the shooting of the Pope. And Bill Clark's...
Where's this happening?
They have it happening in the Oval Office, and Bill is saying to Reagan, the guy who plays Bill Clark, Mark Moses, looks exactly like Bill. And this had my wife crying, right? Because Bill just loved my wife, Susan. She loved Bill Clark. And she's like, he looks exactly like Bill, right? Looks exactly like Bill. But they, and he's telling Reagan, he said, word is that it's a Soviet connection, Bulgarian. And I'm watching that on the big screen next to my daughter, Gianna, and thinking, yeah, that's what Bill told me verbatim. That's what I put in the book verbatim. And there it is verbatim in the script. So it's so good to have
So
it.
as he's writing the script,
Yeah.
is he sending you sections and you're advising, you're red penning?
Yeah, we had, the scriptwriter ultimately became Howie Klausner, who did a fantastic job. He did a great job with the script. And there were many drafts along the way, especially because this book took, do the math, 2004, God and Ronald Reagan came out. I get the call at the beach in Dixon, Illinois from Mark. The movie comes out in 2024. It took 20 years. 20 years to make a movie, to raise the money to make a movie about not just a Republican icon, conservative icon, but an American icon.
And other than the miniseries attempts at the Reagan story, never to the big screen.
Never to the big screen, and nothing like this. Not a major motion picture biopic, right? I think the reported budget online, Wikipedia and so forth, $25–30 million altogether to do this. And the biggest problem we had, and Mark Joseph could do a whole documentary just on, you'll appreciate this, the difficulty of getting conservatives and conservative Christians to contribute to a movie. They won't do it. They'll give money to think tanks, policy reports. I mean, the American left, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, there were already like 3 scripts in Hollywood sitting on the desk of like a major studio.
And is the lesson of that conservatives don't think in story, that we're not as creative? Or
I mean, we are and we should be, but I think the people with the money to support that kind of stuff don't. Right. And so it doesn't get made. And one of the big doubters, who I won't give his name, but all along kept telling me, this was a Hollywood person, Mark, right? Mark Joseph. Mark is never going to get that movie made. He's never, and he kept trying to talk me into joining with him to leave Mark to do a separate. And I'm like, no, Mark and I, we see this as a Christian brother thing, right? We're sticking together. And I had others telling me, he should be giving you $10,000 a year by this contract to retain that. I said, no, we're not doing that to each other, right?
Right.
We're going to stick in this
Did you get
together.
an apology?
No, but the guy did call me when we got Dennis Quaid to play Reagan. And he said, I just want to tell you, and he said, I just want to tell you congratulations, the movie's got to be made. I said, really? Why? And he said, because you got Dennis Quaid. I said, yeah, it's that simple? He said, it's that simple. You get a major actor like that, you're done.
Let me bring Grove City into this a little bit. So you're here at Grove City, not in Hollywood, but you're doing all of this while you're teaching classes and writing and doing opinion work and all that. How does that actually happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, with email and telephones and everything, you don't have to be on site. Although I had at least a half dozen occasions over the years when I would see Mark and we would get together. And Bill Clark's funeral, I mean, that was one of them. That was one of the times where Mark and I sat and had a kind of another strategy session to talk about things. But all along, a lot of phone calls, a lot of communicating, emailing scripts back and forth.
When they finally started filming, were you on set? Did you go to location? Did you talk to Dennis Quaid?
I did, yeah. Met Dennis, great guy, really neat guy, and I got a lot of fun stories I could tell you about that. But I had just come from Bloomington, Indiana, because I was out there for the American Spectator. That's where the American Spectator was founded. I'm the editor-in-chief of the American Spectator. I succeeded Bob Terrell in that position. Yeah, and so Bob, I told Dennis Quaid, I said, hey, one of my favorite movies that you ever did was Breaking Away, from late 1970s. And I said, ironically, I was just in Bloomington, Indiana, which is the place, I was looking for the strip mine in that film, where where you dive in, and he just snapped. He said, that's one of my favorite movies, and started talking about it. But yeah, I met him there, met a bunch of the other actors, formed kind of a special bond with David Henry, who plays young Reagan, the lifeguard.
Impressive.
Yeah, he's really impressive. He's a really solid Christian
and looked
guy.
a lot like him.
He looked a lot like him, and boy, he had the mannerisms of Reagan down, young Reagan, which I think a lot of people don't appreciate because they never saw Reagan that early on, 30s and 40s. But Dennis Quaid, I was so impressed and surprised at how well he did with Reagan, because Andrew Coffin, who runs the Reagan Ranch Center in California and was in the first class I taught here at Grove City College, Comparative Politics, Reagan Ranch was heavily involved in a lot of the scenes in the movie. The movie was filmed in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and a lot of scenes also at the Reagan Ranch. And Andrew's kind of a film buff. And he says the impressive thing about Quaid is he pulls off playing Reagan without it being a caricature. Like somebody, right? You know what I mean? Somebody who's trying to, we were always afraid that the focus is always going to be on the guy who plays Reagan. Does he make funny mannerisms? Right. Does he seem a little corny? Does he seem almost like a parody, like a character? But
which
Quaid
most of those who portrayed Reagan do.
Right, exactly. Yeah. He just had a way of, and they sent me one of the original pictures of Dennis at the ranch wearing the hat and the denim shirt, and it was texted to me by, I think, Mark.
Was it Reagan's hat? Was there ephemera in the movie that...
Yes. Yeah,
we can look for and say that was actually Reagan?
Yeah, because they're actually at the ranch, they're there and everything, and it was either Mark or Andrew who sent me the picture of Dennis and said, what do you think? And I thought, whoa, I think you're onto something there.
So talk scenes. Scenes in the movie that are your favorites, where you got lost in the movie.
Yeah,
said, this is really my story come to life.
Well, I was, by the way, let me say this too. I hope, because this will sound in a more humble way. When I first saw the movie, I told Mark said, Joseph said, what did you think? And I said, well, don't take this the wrong way, but I'm really surprised it's really good. I said, I did not expect it to be that good. And
it's kind of like a child for you. I mean, this is...
Right. And the first time I saw it was a private screening in Nashville, summer of 2022. I had to go back and look that up. And so the next time that I saw it was actually on the big screen at the Hollywood premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater. It was like August 20th, 2024. And watching it on the big screen, one of my suggestions was take the assassination of Reagan from where it is right here and put it right in the front of the movie. I mean, that you want to start it with bang, bang, bang. So we did that. And by the way, so for that to be the opening scene in the film, 4 weeks after Donald Trump was shot in Butler, had potential assassination.
In the movie theater, that was clear that when people watched that scene,
yes,
there was a visceral reaction to it.
Yeah, visceral reaction. And then for me, so that's all dramatic enough, and I'm looking around and I could see everybody watching it. And then to have the voiceover of Dennis Quaid, who's got Reagan nailed, saying, you know, my mother always taught me that everything happens for a reason, according to a divine plan by the hand of God.
The DP.
Yeah, and then I got chills because I thought, you know, that's my stuff. I mean, it's Reagan's words, but you know, that's how I opened God of Ronald Reagan, right? And I'm like, oh, that's good. I kind of felt a few times like Peter Robinson did when Peter said, I wrote the Tear Down This Wall speech. I wasn't there to see it. And I knew that when the Gipper delivered that line, it would be good. But when I saw it on television, right, Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall, I thought, oh, that's even better than I thought. And so I felt that way about that line. I was touched. I was moved to tears a number of times.
What about the scenes at the Kremlin, the imagined conversations that were happening in response when the Crusader comes up in dialogue? What were your thoughts about that, and how do you advise them to make it?
So it wasn't my idea to come up with Victor as this fictional character.
It seemed to work.
Right, it seemed to work, and I thought it was great. I thought it was really good. And so he's like a composite character of a number of different KGB people who refer to Reagan as the Crusader. I mean, they were watching Reagan going back to his testimony before the House Committee on Un-American Activities in October 1947. And if anybody will see when they read the book, The Crusader, I open up with 3 quotes in the beginning, and 2 of them are from Soviet guys in the 1970s referring to him as a Crusader. So we created the one composite character to represent that. Otherwise, everything is, nobody's made up. So I think we can get away with that use of that fictional device. The one story that I was most touched by, and that you'll appreciate, and the Grove City College audience will appreciate, after God of Ronald Reagan came out, probably about 2 years later, I got a call from somebody who said, Paul, my name is Pastor Louis Evans. I live in California, and I was speaking very slowly, I was Ronald Reagan's senior pastor at the National Presbyterian Church. I'm like, yeah, you were. I know who you are. And he said, I really enjoyed your book, God and Ronald Reagan. I know you didn't interview me. That's okay. You wouldn't know how to reach me. I'm now retired in California. I think I was living in Fresno. And I want to tell you some things that you need to know. Now, I later learned that he was dying. All right, so he didn't want to take these things to the grave with him. And he told me a number of things. Also told me about his Grove City College.
Record that, or you just grab your pen and pad?
Writing down as quick as I can. I could tell you stories about pulling off of I-79, almost wrecking the car, and just started writing down right away. Frank Shakespeare telling me about Reagan and the Pope and all kinds of stuff. But with Evans, I started writing it down, and he said, now I know where Grove City College is. I used to watch basketball games up there with my dad in the 50s and 60s. I said, what? And his father was pastor at Third Presbyterian Church in Shadyside. Wow. So there's all these different connections. And he said, I want to tell you something about Nancy. Now, Paul, I haven't said anything negative about Nancy, have I? No, sir, you haven't. I know everybody all the time is attacking Nancy, including on things related to faith. Yes, sir, yes, sir. Well, I want to tell you about this. So it was the night that Reagan was shot, and Louis Evans was summoned to go get Don Mumaw, who was Reagan's pastor at the Bel Air Presbyterian Church. Nancy said, please fly in Don, right? So they flew him in. Louis Evans goes to pick him up at Dulles, or what was later Reagan National Airport in Alexandria. Picks him up, go to the White House. It's Nancy, a couple other Reagan friends. Frank Sinatra is there. He was very close to Reagan. Billy Graham? Oh, I should know that. Louis Evans is there, and Don Mumaw. And Nancy says, you know, Pastor, I'm struggling with this burden, this kind of indefinable sense of guilt. And they're like, you feel guilty? Why? About the shooting? Why? She said, because I always stand at Ronnie's left side. And if I had been standing at his left side, as I should have been, when he walked out of that building, 2:25 p.m., March 30th, 1981, Washington Hilton, I could have taken that bullet for him.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah, and I said, oh. Wow. I said, I've never heard that. And he said, I don't think anybody's heard. He said, other than the people in that room, and no one's reported it. And so I put that in the book, And I told the story when Nancy died in March 2016 in a piece for Fox News. And Megyn Kelly tracked me down and said, please come on my show and tell that story. So I told it then, but otherwise I don't think very many people remembered it. So I'm sitting there in the movie theater, and Jeff, I don't know who stuck it into the script. I don't think I did. I went back to see if I could. Howie Klausner must have put it in. But Reagan is waking up from being shot, and Nancy, who's played beautifully by Penelope Ann Miller. I mean, if this was a movie about Michelle Obama, she would win an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, right? She does Nancy so well. And Reagan is coming to, and Nancy is there, Penelope Ann Miller, and she says, you know, Ronnie, if I had just been at your left side at that moment, and he says, well, then it would have been you. And she tells me would have taken the bullet. And I saw that and I went, oh, yeah, they got that in the movie, yeah. And that's one scene that everybody seems to remember. And I saw, somebody sent me a clip of Penelope Ann Miller and Dennis Quaid on Good Morning America together for like 10 minutes, and they played that clip. And then Penelope, tears are running down her face, even after she played it. So that was really gratifying to see that.
Talk a little bit about the aftermath of the movie. It almost became, maybe it was the release date, maybe because we were just so starved for having a reminder of some level of normalcy in the country.
Right.
But it became a huge hit, and this online movement developed. What happened to the movie, and kind of what is the future for the Reagan story as you see it?
Yeah, it did enormously well. The release, I mean, it was 3,500 theaters. It was behind only, Dead, what is it, the movie with, I can't remember. But
a forgettable movie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a movie that made a lot of money. But it came Wolverine.
Okay, yeah.
And that's not the full title of it. Came in second only to that weekend, and then early in the week, in the early weekdays, actually it was #1 at the box office. Did really well. Had a 98% approval from fans who saw it, and the critics was like 17-18%. It's like the biggest gap in the history. And I looked this up, Jeff. You'll appreciate this. A lot of the critics were born after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Okay, and they called the movie hagiography. They just couldn't believe that all of this even happened. Right? And the frustrating thing about that was we gave them, they claim they want unity. They don't want division anymore in politics. They hate division. We gave them a movie about unity. We have Reagan and Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, holding hands praying together after Reagan's been shot. I mean, Tip's holding a rosary. They're reciting the Psalm, right? Psalm 23. I mean, can you imagine Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi doing that? So
AI imagines scenes like that every now and then.
Right. Yeah. We just showed we had no partisan shots at Biden, Kamala Harris, Democrats, nothing like that, And they dumped on it anyway, because I think that to them, a lot of people today are after his name, Republican, evil, bad. And they can't imagine a time where a Republican or any president could win 49 out of 50 states, could win the Electoral College 525 to 13. So the timing, Mark and I said this a number of times, seemed like the DP, right? The divine plan. We thought it was going to come out 2013, 2014, 2015. Then people are saying never. And then to come out just as it did, I thought was really, seemed like part of the DP.
Let me ask you a final question.
Yeah.
All the research, every time you do a book on Reagan, or take one of these paths, follow the Pope's trail, others, is there another book on Reagan? Is there a piece of Reagan that is undiscovered? Is there a story left to tell?
Yeah, on Reagan and race. Reagan was, I had to have been, I don't know how you quantify, measure this, had to have been the least racist president that the country ever had close black friends his entire life, and yet he's really being smeared right now on race for reasons that have been completely misreported. So right now, at this moment, the longest manuscript that I've ever written is on Reagan and race. And so I'm looking at publishing that hopefully in the next year or two. That would be, I think, my 9th book on Reagan. I never counted them until when the movie thing came out, and they said, we need to know how many Reagan books you've done. So I counted that, 8 Reagan books. And I did, It's even longer than my book on a Pope and a President, Reagan and John Paul II. And we have a script for that, not with Mark Joseph, but my friend Scott Sander and Ponce Productions. I never do these books ever thinking that they're going to be a movie. I mean, ever.
You might have to start thinking that way.
I don't know. Maybe.
Paul Kengor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.